20.
Good morning, everybody. I'm just in the process of allowing everybody to enter this morning's talk, so please bear with just for a moment while everybody comes in from the waiting room. We're nearly there, just waiting for a couple more people to come through. It's lovely to see you all this morning.
Morning.
Good morning. So just a few more people joining us. Let's just wait for more people to come in. Nearly there. Okay, I think we're there. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's coffee morning talk about owls. I'd like to introduce Ken Anckorn, who you can see there. Ken will be giving today's talk. He has worked for the Trust for a long time, and he's actually about to retire for what, the third time, I think, Ken? We haven't let him go, basically.
I'm just waiting for a decent enough present before I go.
So, and for those of you who don't know me, my name is Claire Courtier. I'm the Community Engagement Manager for Surrey Wildlife Trust. So today, Ken will be delivering the talk, but I'm just going to be behind the scenes doing all the Zoom technical bits and pieces. And I'll also be compiling any questions that you have for Ken, and we'll have chance after his talk to answer those. Okay, so before we begin, there's just a couple of housekeeping bits and pieces. We are recording this morning, so if you don't wish to be recorded, just turn your cameras off. Whilst Ken is talking, if we could ask you all just to mute yourselves, and then when we come into the Q&A at the end, you're welcome to unmute yourselves and ask any questions. If you do have questions, and we really hope that you do, please can you use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. You simply click chat, enter your message, send that through to me, and then I will compile those for Ken, and we'll have chance this morning to answer those questions. Or if you'd prefer, you might like to ask questions in person. So after Ken's talked, raise your hand, we can unmute you, and you can ask your question in person. Okay, all right, so we really hope that you enjoy this morning's talk, and over to you, Ken.
Okay, thank you. The opportunity to talk about owls is something that I really quite enjoy because they are a particular fascination for me. They're very interesting class of bird, and I just wanted to share some information with you and give you an opportunity to ask some questions afterwards, all about a group of birds which perhaps everybody is aware of, but they have a lot of particularly interesting features which I think be interesting to touch on, and maybe get some feedback from you, because I think everybody probably has some experience of owls. So it'd be interesting to hear from you at the end to see what information you have, because everything that we can collect is useful, and it gets fed back into that general pool of knowledge which we can all tap into. So to kick off, owls are in effect one of the many birds of prey. What is a bird of prey? Well, it's a bird that tackles live prey with beaks and talons. So it fits in well with the other birds of prey which you'd be familiar with, the hawks, the vultures, the falcons. They're all birds of prey, but owls have a lot of special adaptations which obviously makes them slightly different from those other groups. So the owls have their own family, if you like. There's a true family and a subfamily which is in fact the barn owls. They have some modifications of structure which separates them from what is called the true owls, which takes in all the other types of owls, the tawny owls, the burrowing owls, the eagle owls. The name for the true family is the Strigiformes, which is not very exciting, but that is a way of grouping them together. And they vary hugely in size. The smallest owl that we have in the world is referred to as the elf owl. It's a tiny little thing. It weighs about an ounce, or 28 grams if you're a modern person, and it's about the size of a sparrow. It's a little burrowing owl, and it comes from the western United States, a desert animal. That's the smallest one, the elf owl. The largest is one of the eagle owls. It's the Blakeston fish owl. There's a lot of different eagle owls, and they're all roughly the same size, but this one is regarded as being the biggest, and it weighs in at a colossal 4 kilograms with a 2-meter wingspan. Now that is a heck of a size of a bird. It's about the same size as a golden eagle. So yeah, there's quite a variation in size. There's about 225 species of owl around the world. It's rough because there probably are a few more out there still to be found. Some are very secretive, and of course, being owls, they're largely nocturnal. So yes, I wouldn't be surprised if there's some new species come along in the not too distant future. The main characteristics of owls that make owls different, of course, are quite a number of things, really. Firstly, what they look like. Generally, an upright stance. When you see an owl perched, it's sitting upright, whereas other birds of prey, like falcons, are more horizontal. But they have particular adaptations for their form of hunting. They have what is referred to as binocular vision. That's like us. We can use both our eyes to focus in on the same object. Although with us, of course, our eyes are in the front of our heads. So we can move our eyeballs, and that's what gives us the ability to focus. Owls, the eyes are actually on the sides of their heads. So to be able to focus, they need to turn their heads. And that's why, as you probably know, the owl is able to turn its head further than most other species. It can rotate its head to about 270 degrees. That's quite a circle, considering 360 degrees is the full circle. Can't quite manage that, but that's getting pretty close. And to be able to do that, it needs physical adaptations, which include twice the number of vertebrae in the neck. There's 14 vertebrae in an owl's neck and only 7 in ours. And the blood vessels are much larger, so that when the bird twists, it doesn't constrict the blood supply, and which would happen if it didn't have that. And of course, without blood feeding the head, it wouldn't last very long. So it's got extremely good vision, and its other sense, which it uses, obviously having good vision at night is extremely important. A lot of owls hunt not necessarily during the middle of the night, but they are dawn and dusk hunters, so they can operate in lower light levels. But a primary sense for them is, of course, their hearing sense. And in fact, in a lot of species, that's much more important than sight, particularly species like barn owls, which have good vision. It's better than ours, but it's not hugely better than ours. But their hearing is tremendously good. The benefit, the adaptation that they have for improved hearing is to have their ears located slightly at different heights on each side of their head. So one ear is slightly higher than the other. So that means the sound hits them at each ear at a slightly different time. And that difference allows the brain to process the sound and allow the animal to focus in on much more closely of where the sound comes from. You'll also know with owls, they often have a facial disc, or the feathers surround the eyes, gives them that sort of familiar owl face. Well, that's another adaptation to gather the sound so that it comes in much more effectively to the ears. So those birds which hunt with hearing, like the barn owl, have a particularly strong facial disc, whereas other owls which hunt more by vision don't need that additional benefit. They hunt, as you said, with their sight and with the hearing, and they tend to catch their prey with their talons rather than their bill. And again, with owls, one of their features is the particularly strong feet and talons that they have. Often the feet are much larger than you would expect on the bird of that size. If you get a good chance to have a good close-up look at an owl, you will be able to see that the feet are particularly large. And like most birds of prey, they have a very, very strong grip. If you get the opportunity to go on one of the go to one of the bird of prey centres, they'll quite often allow you to get a bird of prey onto your wrist, and they'll give you quite a heavy leather glove to put on your wrist, because the bird of prey, when it lands on you, will grip, and that grip is tremendously strong. Even a small bird, you will really feel the grip. One of the larger birds of prey is quite capable of breaking a bone in your hand. One of the larger falcons or an eagle will quite easily break a bone, and the larger eagles can break an arm bone quite easily. So that grip, when it hits the bird of the prey animal, is enough to kill it, because it squeezes with such a tension that the animal stands no chance. The beak is then used either to tear the animal apart to eat, or to carry the prey away. It's not really the killing item. Because hearing is so important for them, they have to reduce the outside sound, if you like, the distracting sound that there might be around them. And one of those causes of the sound is themselves flying. If you've been close to a bird and hear it flapping its wings, it's quite noisy. So owls have a particular adaptation in their feathers to reduce that sound to virtually nothing. They, instead of having flat edges to their feathers like most birds, the owl's wing feathers, the leading feathers, are ridged, and that breaks up the air as it flows over them and reduces the sound almost to nothing. They also have small feathered edges, which again reduces the sound. Their feathers as well are very large and very fluffy, and that is a further adaptation for sound reduction. So when they're hunting, when you've probably seen a barn owl hunting, or one of the other owls, they're quartering the habitat and listening for the sounds of animals in the grass, and the flapping of the wings doesn't distract from the sound that they're listening for. So they're able to focus closely in on the sound of small mammals scurrying about in the grass underneath their feet. The owls have a great variety of habitats and a great variety of prey animals. The smallest like the elf owl, feed largely on insects. Um, Obviously, the smaller the owl, the smaller the birds, the species it can pick off. But it will also tackle even quite large prey, small mice, reptiles, and that's because of those very strong talons. Even a small owl has a very strong grip, and it's capable of killing what might be a fairly large animal compared to the size of the owl. And some of the larger owls can actually take small deer. And again, it's the killing power of the talons that helps them be able to take so many different items of prey. They hunt, some owls will hunt during the day. A lot of owls will hunt just as it's getting dark and in the morning, and some at night. So that also affects the type of animal that they hunt. The ability to hunt at night, of course, means that they have less competition from other birds of prey. So it helps them fill a niche that would be occupied by competition. So it's a way of nature allowing different species to exist in the same areas. But of course, there are outside pressures which might result in clashes. Barn owls particularly are subject to predation by other birds of prey. Because of their particular nature, they have to hunt almost constantly. They've lost the ability to store fat, so they've got to eat every day. And when food is scarce or when they're feeding the family, it often means that they have to hunt during the day, and that makes them vulnerable to predation from other birds of prey. And I've quite often seen barn owls out hunting being tackled by birds like kestrels, which will swoop down and take away the mouse that they've just spent ages trying to catch. Birds of prey will also be eaten by larger birds of prey as well, so it is quite risky. So that's a sort of general and fairly brief rundown on owls in general. I thought I would then just go on and talk about the owls that we get in this country, and just run through what you might be likely to see in Surrey. So if I can do a screen share, and let's see if we can do this. Hopefully you can see that. Sorry about that. Right. First owl, I'm going to go through them in order of size. No great problem here. The little owl. A little owl is one of the species that you will find in Surrey. It is, though, an introduction. It's a species which wasn't naturally found in the British Isles. It was introduced in about the 1870s, but it's been around, obviously, then for quite a long time. The first breeding pair were recorded in about 1900. I think it was in Coulsdon. But now we have approximately 30 pairs or so breeding in the county. They are one of the smallest of our species. They are 23, 27 centimeters high. But one of the owls that you're probably more likely to see than any of the others, because they are quite regularly seen during daylight. And they do like to perch on quite exposed positions. Here we have them one on top of a fence post, but it's often seen on top of walls or on trees. And they are hunting by sight, so they will spend quite a lot of time sitting on a good perch looking down on the habitat below them, looking for those smaller mammals, reptiles, insects, which they will be able to pick off. They they're a hole nesting species, and they quite regularly take to artificial nest boxes, and you can purchase these quite easily. They have a peculiar need in their nesting chambers, in that as much as they need to be dark. So they choose some of the deepest cavities that they can find naturally, and in nest boxes they have to be provided with a sort of L-shaped entrance, so that they go in down a passage, then turn a sharp corner to get into the nest box. That serves two purposes. It helps keep predators out, but it also keeps the nesting area dark. And for some reason, they prefer that. They fly quite rapidly. They've got a sort of funny bounding flight. It looks a little bit like a woodpecker. It flaps its wings, then stops, so it sort of dips up and down as it flies along. And it isn't one of the owls that goes to-woo. It has quite a loud screech. But as I say, quite commonly seen around, and one of the ones you're most likely to see during daylight. Next largest is the long-eared owl. Looks like for obvious reasons, but in fact, the feathers that you see at the top of the head aren't its ears. They are simply feathers, and they're used for display. The ears are located like any other owl, sort of around about the level of the eye, tucked in behind the facial disc. The long-eared owl is really a winter visitor. It doesn't tend to breed in Surrey, and we get a small number each year. They are not an uncommon bird on the continent, but we only get a handful, some years none at all. They often, though, you might, if you come across one, it'll be roosting in a dense bush, and they have a very clever habit of, when they're roosting and they don't want to see, they pull their feathers in very tightly against their bodies, and they can appear extremely thin and almost disappear. So it's quite hard to spot them. But in some cases, they are known to colonial roost. So you might come across even a group of 3 or 4 roosting in the same bush. But as I say, a winter visitor, and probably not one that you're likely to spot in Surrey. The next one up, the slightly larger than the long-eared owl, is the short-eared owl. And as you can see, you can just about make out 2 very small, well, you call them ear tufts on the top of the head, but again, they're not the ears. They are just feather tufts, the ears again in the same place. Again, for Surrey, mostly a winter visitor. They're coming to Surrey because Surrey is a bit warmer than their normal habitat, breeding habitat in the north and in the continent. A bit more common than the long-eared owl. There are a few sites where you regularly see them during the winter. One of the Wildlife Trust sites that you see them in quite often, most winters, is Papercourt Marshes, down near Old Woking. Quite a big area of grassland beside the river and beside the canal, and they will roost on the ground during the day, and just as it's starting to get dark, they'll come up and start hunting. Some years people have seen 4 or 5 hunting at once, but generally speaking, it's maybe 1 or 2, and not every year. So again, a winter visitor, the odd breeding record in the county, but generally not. But this is the time of year, and I think if you looked at the SWT Bird Club recent sightings page, There was a sighting of a short-eared owl at the beginning of December, but I haven't seen records of them at Papercourt in the last few days, but they can start turning up at any time. So it's worth keeping an eye, if you're interested in seeing them, on that Surrey Bird Club recent sighting site. Next one up is the one we're probably most familiar with, is the barn owl. Barn owls are the most legally protected of our owl species. They're what is known as a Schedule 1 species of conservation concern. It means that their nest sites are protected by law, the Wildlife and Countryside Act, and it's an offence to disturb an active barn owl nest and its young. The reason for that is, of course, they are quite scarce and declining in numbers. There are perhaps 25 to 30 breeding pairs in Surrey, mostly in artificial breeding sites, nest boxes in barns and in old farm buildings. And in, of course, nest boxes that people have been providing in trees. Although, of course, their natural nesting site is in holes in large old trees or cliffs, that sort of thing. I have had a license to survey for barn owls, which meant that I could check out where they were nesting. You need an even better license to go and ring them. As you can see, this one has been ringed, as I say, because they are particularly protected. The reason they're declining is lack of habitat, lack of food, really. Although other reasons come into it, that's probably the main reason. They are in effect a bird of warmer climes. They, as I said before, they don't have fat stores, so they have to hunt constantly through the year, which means that they have to find their prey items, which for barn owls are mostly small mammals. So they need to have the habitat that small mammals like, which is often dense grassland, old grassland, which has formed a thatch with the dead grass falling down and providing the cover that the small mice and voles need. So the barn owls need that habitat in their nesting territories so that they can provide enough food for their young. And an active pair of nesting barn owls will go through 3,000 small mammals in a good nesting season. So that's why farmers were very keen to encourage them to nest in their barns, because they're a very efficient rodent control. But rodents go through years of boom and bust. Some years they breed extremely well and there are lots of them about, and the barn owls do very well. And then for some reason, presumably lack of food, the numbers of voles crash, and then the barn owls suffer, and the numbers drop, the breeding success drops, and they have a really bad year. And of course, because they don't have fat reserves, they are very susceptible to really cold weather. Long periods of snow are enough to kill them off as well, because they find it more difficult to hunt. So one advantage, if you like, of global warming is that barn owls probably will do slightly better, because they are less likely to be hit by those severe cold weather spells that can really knock their numbers back. And the one that we most associate with our owl species, of course, is the tawny owl. This is the owl which is really our woodland owl. It nests in woodlands, it hunts in woodlands mostly, although it will come out and hunt along the edges. This is the one that we get the twit-twoo, although, as you know, it's two different calls. The male makes a sort of quick call, and the female produces the hoo call, which is much stronger in the breeding season. So you will hear them talking to each other. It's probably the most feisty of our owls as well. It's quite territorial. You won't get many tawny owls in the same area of woodland. They will see each other off, and they have been known to have a go at people who have been interfering with their nest sites. This is usually people who have maybe gone up to ring the nestlings, and there is a famous case of one of our famous bird photographer, Eric Hoskins. He lost an eye to a tawny owl when he was trying to ring some chicks in a nest. So yes, don't go near tawny owl nest sites. You shouldn't go near owl nest sites anyway, but tawnies are particularly prone to defend their nesting sites. They're the largest of our, shall we say, common owls, and the ones that are most likely to be found in Surrey. But I've thrown in another 2 species which are seen in this country, meaning the British Isles. The eagle owl. Now, there's a bit of controversy about this because although there is a small breeding population in the north of England, the experts haven't decided whether they are escapees or whether they are truly wild birds that have come into the country from abroad. They are quite common just across the channel, and they're big birds. As you say, the eagle owls are the biggest owl family, and they're quite capable of flying across the North Sea. So I've included them. Not really likely to see them in Surrey, although they have again, occasionally one will appear, and it becomes big news because it's a big bird and it's got those wonderful eyes. And although they're quite inconspicuous when they're roosting, if you do spot one, it soon becomes news. Although in themselves, they're quite, they're not as feisty as the tawny owl. So they do like to hide away, which is why they tend to have chosen quite remote areas in Yorkshire to nest, and they will hide their nests quite well in very dense undergrowth in trees, tending to use old nests from crows and things like that to nest in. And one other, the snowy owl. It did actually breed in Shetland in the 60s and the 70s. There was a pair breeding up there. No longer, unfortunately. One poor male stayed on for a long time after the female disappeared, but they are there no longer. But I think we had one sighted in Cornwall not that long ago. So I've just thrown in those those other 2 species just for information's sake. But in Surrey, as I say, the ones that we tend to see are the little owl, the barn owl, and the tawny owl as our residents, and the short-eared owl as a winter visitor, and a very rare visitor is the long-eared owl. So that's a quick run through the owls. I'll stop sharing the screen now. And yes, if anybody has any questions, I shall do my best.
Thank you so much, Ken. I love that. I hope everybody else enjoyed Ken's talk. Really, really interesting. What I'm certainly enjoying about these coffee mornings, I'm also learning loads about wildlife as well as doing all the behind the scenes, which is great. Does anybody have any questions for Ken? Now, as I said earlier, either raise your hand, unmute yourself, and feel free to ask him in person, or use the chat function below. So I've actually seen we've got one question come through already for you, Ken. This is from Keith, and he asks, he has a comment more than a question, just to say Richmond Park is good for little owls.
Yeah.
I don't know if you were aware of that. Thank you, Keith. I'll just give everybody a moment just to have a think, and if they have any questions. Oh, Betty, you have a question?
Yes, Ken, that was really interesting. Is there any relationship between the colour of owls' eyes and the time of day when they hunt, or any other factor?
Owls have quite unusual shaped eyes. They are tubular, rather than if you can imagine our eyes as being more or less a sphere. Their eyes are elongated, and that allows a greater number of sense cells, so that they can absorb much more light. So it's the size of the eye which is different. The color, to be honest, I'm not sure if that makes a big difference in their method of hunting. I think the eyes are particularly big and noticeable, and that's obviously again another feature for them to allow them to collect as much light as possible. But whether the iris color being a sort of really orangey color like the eagle owl, or a yellow color is also an adaptation, that's a question I don't actually know the answer to.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ken, we've got quite a few questions coming in actually. Now I can see Ginny has raised her hand to ask a question. So Ginny, I'm going to unmute you, and if you'd like to ask your question, hopefully if I can get Zoom to play. Bear with. Okay, Ginny, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. So I'm interested, you mentioned, unfortunately I lost internet connection, so I might have missed something, but you mentioned that when little owls breed in nest boxes, they choose a site, they like a nest box with a corner so that they can nest in the dark. And I wondered, do they also nest in natural, sites that they've chosen in trees and so forth? And if so, do they choose that same sort of shape? And also I'm about 90% sure I did see a breeding pair quite a few years ago just in Reigate, just near the allotments on the edge of the Priory Park in a large oak. So I wondered if you thought that was likely to be a correct sighting.
That area, yes, it's the sort of habitat that they like. They're not inhabited like the tawny owls. They don't like dense woodland. They're more sort of parkland, open territory birds. I've seen them in Yorkshire, in that sort of limestone pavement country.
Oh, right.
So really open country, and I've seen them perched on walls along Hadrian's Wall in Northumberland, in the middle of very bleak moorland. And also, of course, as I said, Richmond Park, which is that sort of parkland open habitat, because they like to sit up on something and look down on the ground to catch their prey. So yes, that your sighting is quite likely. They will nest in natural. Obviously, they did and still do nest in natural holes. They tend to choose the darker ones. I'm not quite sure why that adaptation is of benefit to them, but I think because of their size, they'd really like to get themselves tucked away. And through trial and error, it was found that using boxes with that L-shaped entrance hole made it more successful for the little owls as well. So yeah, I think the answer is that they prefer a fairly small hole and a fairly narrow entrance to keep the light level down and to deter predators. It's easier for them to defend a small entrance hole.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ginny. That's great. Okay, so we've got quite a few questions coming in about little owls. I will just go through the different questions. So the first one, Ken, is from Sarah, and she says, we once found a tawny owl in their living room. Do they sometimes come down a chimney?
Yes, it is known. I mean, I think the commonest birds that come down the chimney are the jackdaws, and because yes, they're looking for nesting spaces. The tawny owl, if you can buy two types of tawny owl boxes. One that you attach to an upright surface, and one which tends to be attached to the underside of a branch, because they will choose that different type of location for their nest. So they are quite likely to think that a chimney is a nice deep nesting hole and get themselves down there.
Thanks, Ken. Thank you, Sarah. Who'd have thought that? That's really interesting. Okay, we have a question from Keith, and he asks, where did the little owls come from originally? Do you know?
Yeah, they're quite a widespread species, and they came over from the sort of continent area around the Mediterranean, that sort of location. So yeah, little owls aren't rare, but they weren't naturally in our isles until they were brought over. I think they were brought in as an attractive species, and either were released naturally or escaped, which is often the way that birds find their way into our countryside.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, and a question from Phil. Where are the little owls breeding in Surrey? Are you allowed to say?
Really, I honestly don't. I know I've seen one or two sites myself, but it's a case of the right sort of habitat and the right sort of nesting opportunity, and that's really what guides where the owls are found. As I say, they like the parkland, so somewhere like Richmond Park, there's a lot of old trees, and there'll be a lot of natural cavities in some of those old oak trees, and they're bound to be nesting in there. And people have been putting up more nest boxes, and I'm sure there are reports of those being used by little owls. I've put up nest boxes in some of one or two of the Wildlife Trust sites. I don't think we ever actually got a little owl in our nest box. We've had grey squirrel in the nest box, and one of them I was checking and found, instead of a squirrel or an owl in the nest box, we had a colony of wild bees had taken up residence. So I backed away very quickly.
Okay, thank you. And we've had a question from Mary, really interesting question. Can you comment on sighting of barn owl nest boxes on outside of a building in a garden?
Yes, they do have quite strong preferences. The main thing, though, if you're going to site a nest box, is to make sure that there is the right sort of habitat in the area. And I was mentioning they hunt almost entirely small mammals, so they need that sort of dense grassland, long grasses, where the small mammals can live. So if you haven't got that type of habitat near you, then it really is unlikely that you'd be successful with your nest box. So you have to have the right sort of habitat. That's the first thing. Siting the nest box, they find their nest sites by sight. So if you're going to put a nest box up, it has to be visible to a barn owl, in effect, passing by or hunting in the area. So it has to be visible from that grassy habitat. So if you have a garden and you have a number of trees next door to a nice grassy field, then you would put it on the tree that looks out onto that grassland, so that the owl can see the nest box and see the hole. If it can't see the nest box, it's unlikely to find it. There are lots of different shapes of nest boxes on the market. They are fairly large, so you do need a fairly sizable tree. And it needs to be, like most nest boxes, sited so that it's not in direct sunlight too much of the time. So a bit of cover is useful, at an angle away from the sun. But again, it's a compromise, because again, the owls have got to be able to see the nest box hole. Sufficiently off the ground to be away from normal predators or people. So it doesn't have to be enormously high, but 4 or 5 meters would be sufficient on a tree, attached to the trunk, so that it is more or less upright. In a building, barn owls obviously are notorious for going into farm buildings, and then they'll find the top of an inside wall or a nice wide beam to nest on. They don't make a nest as such. They don't bring in twigs and that sort of thing. Their nest consists of the pellets that they regurgitate. All owls produce pellets, so do a lot of other birds of prey and other birds. But owl pellets are the remains of the prey, which are concentrated in the gullet, in the gizzard. They're not swallowed, they don't go into the stomach. The small mammal is swallowed whole, and it's ground up in the gizzard. It has lots of muscles, and it pulverizes the animal. And the food element goes into the stomach. The fur and the bones are concentrated in the gullet, and from time to time are regurgitated as a sort of woolly mass with bones and bits sticking out of it. And that forms the basis of the barn owl nest. And over time, a barn owl's nest can be extremely big, made up entirely of pellets. In fact, I think it's been said that the origin of the clothes moth, which eats her own clothes, is from barn owl nests, where the moth would feed on the fur of the rodents that the animal had eaten. So barn owl pellets, another fascinating area, which I could go into, but I won't now. So internally in the building, as long as the bird has easy access, it could be through open doors that, or a special hole which is made in the side of the building. It doesn't have to be very big. Size of a compact disc is sufficiently big for an owl. Doesn't have to be round, it can be square of that sort of dimension. And then just a nesting platform inside the building, so that the owls and the young owls have got somewhere to stand around and wait to be fed. Hope that's enough. There's lots of other things, but those are the main points for a barn owl box.
That's fascinating. Thank you. Thank you, Mary, for asking that question. Okay, so we've got a question from Keith. Does the short ear owl have a call to listen out for at so he can listen for them at paper court?
Yes, it's again, it's not the nice familiar twit-to-woo. It's another screechy call. Not desperately vocal. You're more likely to see them rather than to hear them.
Okay. Is there something, Ken, like could Keith have a look on the RSPB website, or would he be able to do a look up short ear owl and find a recording of the sound?
Yes, yes, I think particularly the RSPB website will give you sound recordings as well.
Always.
Yeah, it's always worth checking that out. It's very difficult to imitate. I'm desperately bad at imitating calls of birds, but it's unfortunately not on one of these twit-to-woo calls. It's more of a screech. Barn owl screech is very loud, very scary. which is one of the reasons why owls are in this country obviously regarded as ill-omened birds, usually because of the call. That's fairly general around the world, although of course they also have the reputation of being wise birds, but I think that's more to do with the appearance rather than the fact that they're night animals and have quite an eerie sort of call.
Okay, thanks, Ken. And a question from Elsa. She saw a pale-coloured owl in Green Lane, West Clarendon. Would it likely be a barn owl or a tawny?
What was it doing?
Elsa, would you be happy? Would you like to unmute yourself? Would you?
Yeah, I've seen a couple. We live in Green Lane, and walking the dog in dusk, I've seen a couple in the field just hovering, very pale. And then I did see one sitting on our fence and took a photo. It wasn't a very good photo, but it could be either. I wasn't sure. But I think they're nesting nearby.
It sounds more like a barn owl than a tawny owl. They can be extremely pale. They can also be quite dark. There's a race variation as well. Barn owls are found almost around the world, so there's all sorts of different ones. We get the sort of middle type color range, so they can be quite pale. They can be fairly dark, but by the sound of it, then the sort of habitat that you saw them in, it's much more likely to be a barn owl hunting rodents.
Thank you.
It's really exciting, but you're going to have to get out there and have another look, aren't you? See if you can spot us again.
See them this time of year because it's getting cold, and the owls have got to hunt quite a lot to keep eating, to get the energy to keep warm. So winter is actually one of the better times to keep barn owls.
I'll take better photos next time. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Ken. Okay, and a really good question from Melissa. She asks, could you suggest some good resources to learn more about owls?
Well, one thing you can do is support one of the charities that work with owls. The Barn Owl Trust is a very good charity. They're worth having a look at. They're the ones that issue the licenses for barn owl surveyors. I got a license so that I could survey to find out where barn owls were. I wasn't allowed to interfere with them. If I found a barn owl, I had to back away very quickly. It was just really to record where they were. But they also do a lot in advisory work and a lot of conservation work with barn owls, and deal with sick barn owls as well. But the other organisations like the RSPB and the BTO are worth checking out.
Right. Okay. And we've got a really great comment from Claire here as well. That she says her mother-in-law once found a little owl in her desk drawer, and she was in Lincolnshire at the time, and she's wondering perhaps her chimney was the reason for this as well.
Yes, slightly unusual. Yes.
Yeah. Great discovery, though. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. And we've got Ginny says there's just a couple of more comments come through. Ginny says, I visited Birds of Prey Centre in Wales that rescued owls of all species. The little owl looks so fierce, very feisty compared to the other breeds.
Yes, they are.
Small but mighty.
Absolutely. The small owls are really the other species as well, the little scops owls that you get in the Mediterranean. And they have exactly the same look. Those big yellow eyes, I think, that does it.
Okay, and then Michael's just one more comment that's come in from Michael, and he says, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, orphidness.
Yes.
he says it's probably the best place that he's been to watch owls, because of catching the boat over and small car park is normally nice and quiet in the early evening. That it's a National Trust site, but it's closed for the moment. And if anybody's interested, if you can see the chat, he's posted a link there as well, if anybody's interested.
Yeah, Orford Nest, that's over in Suffolk. It was a site where the army tested nuclear devices. So it's full of all sorts of concrete structures. But so it was an isolated, it's a sand spit island, and it's no longer used. It was abandoned years ago. In fact, the National Trust look after some of the concrete structures as old monuments now. But because of its isolation, it was fantastic for bird life, and good for birds like the short-eared and long-eared owl, because that's a sort of habitat that they quite like. And it was handy because that was coming across from the continent. That's one of the first bits of land that they would arrive at. So coastal areas are very good for the long-eared and the short-eared owls. But that's why Papercourt's good as well, because it's a big area of rough grassland, and they'll roost during the day tucked away in the grassland and come up at dusk and start hunting around the grass for their mammals.
Thanks, Ken. I think it's obviously such a large topic. We could go on for ages, couldn't we? It'd be fascinating. Thank you. And I've just noticed, Michael, also that the link that I mentioned is actually, he's added a link to the BTO, that's the calls on their site, bird calls. So can everybody see that in the chat? If not, I can post it so that you can all see that link. Yeah, Keith's thumbs up. Thank you, Keith. Does anybody else, we've got maybe a minute or so more. Does anybody else have any questions that they'd like to ask? I'll just give everybody a moment.
While people are thinking, one thing I should say is, if you do sight an owl, whether it's just a sighting or whether you think they're nesting or not, it's worth contacting the Surrey Wildlife Trust, the Record Centre, and telling them where you've seen it and what you've seen, because most of the owl species are in trouble in this country, and it's extremely useful to know where they are still being seen, and having records of where they're still surviving is extremely useful for all sorts of purposes. So do let us know if you spot one. It's always useful to have information on any bird or mammal sighting. It all adds to the sum of knowledge, which we find extremely useful for looking at Surrey's wildlife. You probably all heard how much trouble the wildlife in Surrey is in. We've lost a lot of species, a lot of them are in trouble. And the more knowledge we have of what we've got helps us to conserve habitats, and just knowing where they are allows us to concentrate our efforts to the best that we can.
That's, yeah, really great suggestion. Ginny actually asks, Ken, should they be submitting current sightings only?
Yes, that's the best thing to do. Obviously, we want to know what's still there, but historic records can also be useful, because knowing where they used to be can be useful if we're looking at habitat management and maybe even habitat expansion. Because if you can put right a problem, if you can plant more trees or improve grassland, you can get species to return to areas that they used to have been in. So knowing where they have been, yeah, that can be useful too.
Great, thank you. Thank you everybody so much for submitting all these questions and comments. Now I'm not seeing any more questions coming in. Now's your chance if you have any final thoughts or things to ask. Just while you're thinking, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us this morning. I hope you found it interesting. I found it fascinating. So thank you, Ken. And I'd like to wish you all a really, really happy Merry Christmas. And let's hope 2021 brings us all back together in person. And although we've enjoyed Zoom and all our online meetings, we would love to be able to see you face to face. Okay. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, everybody, so much. One final question. Sorry. A question from Mary. Are numbers increasing or declining in Surrey? I guess that's sort of general owls rather than a specific species.
Yeah, and fortunately declining just everywhere. Most of the species owl species are having problems. Usually it's a mixture of reasons, loss of feeding territory. Yeah, Surrey is well, you know how densely populated it is, how much building is going on. Yeah, that's why the Wildlife Trust is trying hard now to provide a means of preserving what habitat we've got left and expanding it where we can by improving connectivity between surviving bits of habitat, just to allow animals to have more room to expand again and take advantage of what habitat that we have, and trying to obviously improve what we've got to allow it to support more species. So that's one of our key targets going forward.
Absolutely, thank you, Ken. As members and volunteers, you're probably all aware that the trust is really focusing on connectivity and trying to link up our sites to other landowners. This could be gardens, it could be farmers, all sorts of different landowners, and it's something that we're all really interested in focusing on. So watch the space and see where we go. Really, let's hope some species start to improve. Now we've just had some really lovely messages come in, Ken, just to say thank you, well done, really interesting morning, happy Christmas, some really lovely messages there. So I think on that note, let's finish this morning and wish you all a very Merry Christmas, and I hope to see you again in the new year.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Claire.
Thank
Happy
you.
Christmas.
All right, Merry Christmas. Thanks all.
Bye.
Thanks very much.